Hello, welcome to TelecomTV. My name is Tony Chan, and I'm here with John Healy from Intel.
Hey, Tony.
John, thanks for coming back.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about NFV, and what do you think is the key to success for commercial NFV networks? And perhaps you can put in a few bits about how the OPNFV and open source community plays into that.
Yeah, because there are a number of elements to it. And clearly, the path toward broad-based, multi-vendor commercial implementations for NFV requires, firstly, exactly that, a community of multiple vendors prescribing and subscribing to a set of open standards, open interfaces, interoperability, and of course a path toward fully commercial implementations. So the open source has played a tremendous role in really fueling the innovation cycle for NFV. It's been critically important. We're 5 years on the journey now since the original NFV spec was ratified or published, if you like. And since then we've seen a lot of communities start to spring up around the stack that enables NFV. What OPNFV has done is create then that midstream project to draw from those open source projects and create, if you like, more of an integration validation sort of a set of projects, all the way through now to benchmarking, certification and test. Critically important to enable commercial NFV at scale to occur. So we're well down the path toward commercializing the broad-based multi-vendor implementations of NFV. But we've still a lot more work to go and do. It's
been 3 years since OPNFV has been founded, and since a lot of different platforms and projects and initiatives in the open source community has sprouted up. How does Intel kind of engage with that pool of projects?
Yeah, actually I would even take it a stage back further and say it's 5 years since NFV was originally published in the initial white paper. And what we've seen is a disaggregation of what was a proprietary solution stack for the network. So not surprisingly, the modularization of that stack creates many communities, and indeed many projects have evolved or have initiated focused on each layer. Think about open source controllers for the SDN like ODL. The OpenStack has an orchestration path. Now with ONAP bringing some of the Mano layer and some of the rest of the operating stack that was in eComp together to create another project, and there have been a number of others. In Intel, we've really focused on them for a couple of reasons, and we apply ourselves really deliberately with a set of goals in mind in each case. Firstly, we want to ensure that we can help to proliferate an open democratic ecosystem and operating model and governance around the project. But secondly, we also want to ensure we can help to accelerate the goals of the project itself by contributing the optimizations, the technologies that we're innovating and investing in into each of those projects in their own right, and provide that level of access to our technology such that the community can evolve and take advantage of it. And then lastly, we're really focused on the downstream side from those projects to ensure there's a path to commercialization. That's a key component to ensure the success.
So John, what's Intel's role in open source, and what's the company trying to achieve?
So our goals with open source are pretty straightforward. We want to ensure that the communities that develop continue to have open and democratic processes around how they operate, how they're governed, and how they enable the participation of a broad base of contributors and collaborators and, of course, developers to the goals of the communities. Secondly, we want to ensure that the open source efforts that arise, the downstreams, if you like, distributions, continue to ruggedize and continue to take advantage of many of the innovations we make in our own platforms and in our own technologies. So we're active contributors of real code into those communities to help them to take advantage of those innovations and adopt them into their downstream distributions. And then I think the third is ensuring that there's a path to downstream commercialization from these projects through the vendor base such that the end customers, and that can be in the communications market with the traditional telecom operators, in the enterprise markets where they're consuming for the continued evolution and transformation of their infrastructure, or indeed within the cloud markets, to ensure that there's a commercial path to the fulfillment of actual solutions based on the output from those open source communities. That's a really important part to ensure that the loop can get closed.
Okay. We talk a lot about 5Gs these days, and NFV seems to be a core component of that, and it's almost a critical component. Without NFV, I don't think 5G can exist. How does Intel see that market?
I think 5G represents a revolution in how networks have been built in the past, and more importantly, for the kinds of services that will be enabled on top of them. It's pretty staggering, you know, across all the different vertical markets that will benefit from having 5G enabled infrastructure. But to do that, we need to be capable of managing the resources within the network in a way that is far more flexible, far more scalable than we've ever seen before, which gives rise to this underlying or underpinning that NFV, and indeed I would say SDN, can provide for the infrastructure. Being capable of composing resources on demand relative to the services that are being enabled and implemented is a key component of enabling 5G at scale. So NFV provides for the abstraction of the service from the physical underlying network and the ability to compose resources on demand drawn from all those virtualized assets in a manner that enables the types of, you know, network slicing or very service specific sets of parameters to be achieved on a per service category basis. So it's a key component to enable that to occur.
Traditionally, the mobile industry has been quite close, dominated by a few players, and obviously the implementation of NFV has opened that to other carriers, other vendors. How's Intel engaging that community? Right?
We've really considered it to be an end-to-end proposition. If you consider the evolution at the device level, whether it's IoT types of usages and applications or the client base, all the way through the network infrastructure, where a lot of the NFV and development and support of both the access infrastructure, the edge infrastructure, and the core will evolve, and then all the way back to the data center. So if you think of it end-to-end, you start to consider a service orientation. How do you enable services end-to-end? Preserve value for those services and ensure the right kinds of technologies are consumable at each layer across that service delivery. So in Intel, as we think about the assets we have across our entire portfolio, our focus has been on ensuring that those assets are consumable, of course in the data center and in the cloud, increasingly within the network as we look at the transformation across to virtualized networks and NFV, and then all the way down to the client applications, whether it's at the edge of the network in these, you know, concepts of fog nodes or mobile edge computing, and right down to the clients that are consuming the services for themselves.
Okay. Beyond the network itself and beyond data centers, are there applications that, you know, Intel's looking at that hold a lot of potential?
I think what's really exciting is things like you think about autonomous driving. Tremendous amount of focus on how does the infrastructure evolve and how does 5G enable that to occur, and then you have all of the requirements that become, you know, priority to enable that, like very low latency, very high throughput and mobility of the clients in them themselves, gives rise to then tremendous demand on the infrastructure to provide highly tailored slices of the resources to enable that kind of application to be developed. So great example of what I think 5G will enable, and of course we have a lot of focus in enabling that to occur.
Intel obviously has a pretty big presence here in China, and you're quite involved within this OPNFV community. Do you see any cultural differences between, I guess, Silicon Valley and as opposed to the Chinese community towards open source?
Towards open source, I think less so. I think what we've seen is interesting cultural differences, what you would expect between all of the regions of the world as to how technology has embraced and the pace of adoption and pace of acceleration. What I think is very interesting around a community like OPNFV is it truly brings that multicultural, multi-regional, multi-geo consequence or impact to effect, such that each of the differing areas of the globe benefit from the approaches that are evolving in others. And so you see partnerships and harmonization of standardization or standard approaches, harmonization around the best schemes and technologies to go and to optimize around, and how best to collaborate across multiple partners and customers, in some cases competitors working really closely together to ensure that the better platform is enabled for the market. I think that's the more interesting piece actually than the differences between the different regions.
Great, thank you, John. That was great.
Thank you.